On the cover of this book on my coffee table is a fantasy map of a global train network. Obviously, this is not really meant to be a serious proposal. I mean, who would ever design a route from New Orleans to Tucson to Memphis to San Diego? But it did get me thinking, we actually do already have some level of train service along many parts of this map. And today, I want to look at the spots where we don't. At least the practical corridors. We're going to count down the highest demand rail routes in the world that don't yet have rail service, but probably should. And it's coming up next on Transit World. Videos on all things transportation, with a focus on the developing world. So the analysis for today centers along the gravity model, which looks at the attraction between two items based on two factors: how big they are and how far apart they are. In this case, we're looking at two metro areas, and we're measuring the size by populations, and we're measuring the distance in kilometers from the urban core to the two metros. This is a model used widely in many fields of study, from sociology to trade to astronomy. The gravitational attraction between two planets is actually where the model gets its name. It's also used a lot in transportation planning. It's not a perfect way to model transport, and it usually is used in tandem with other factors and analyses if you're actually doing a real analysis that's not just going on YouTube. But the model is a widely used tool in transportation planning and provides a good approximation of demand. In other words, it's a good place to start. It gives decent directional guidance. So I started by compiling a list of all metro areas in the world with populations over 2 million. I picked 2 million as the cutoff because I figured that was sufficient to capture the largest and most important rail gaps. Also, data are surprisingly hard to gather, especially when you're looking at metro areas, not city populations. And 2 million seemed like a good trade-off between capturing robust, meaningful results and not missing too many cities or getting junk data. So I ended up with about 230 metro areas with populations over 2 million. I probably missed a few, but I did look at a lot of sources. It's not like I just went on one AI query. I think the list is somewhat solid. For each city, I figured out the metro area population and the latitude-longitude coordinates of the city center. Then I ran the gravity model on each city pair from this group of 230. So if you're doing the math, that's a little over 50,000 city pairs, but most of these are pretty irrelevant. In fact, can you guess the most common gravity score? 0. There's just not a lot of connection between, say, Guayaquil, Ecuador, and Dakar, Senegal, or Algiers, Algeria, and Brasilia, Brazil. But there are still plenty of non-zero values. So I looked at the 150 highest ranking city pairs. Then I factored out metro areas that were within 100 kilometers of each other, the idea being that these were really part of the same mega region. Then I took out all the city pairs that already had a rail connection. And I'm defining this as at least one daily scheduled passenger rail service. And I do count it, even if you have to transfer, as long as it wasn't anything too crazy. I also took out city pairs that had what I'm calling geohazards. Either there are hostile politics between the two countries of the two cities, think India, Pakistan, or North and South Korea, etc. Or there's a large body of water that makes a rail connection impractical or perhaps even impossible. South Korea again hit this issue a lot. Seoul has a lot of regional importance with large cities in China and Japan, but I'm assuming we're not building a 200-mile rail bridge. For smaller bodies of water, like rivers and straits, I did keep them on the list. In general, I just decided what I thought looked kind of reasonable. And this dwindled my list of 150 down to 26. And out of these 26, a lot of them were bunched in the same 5 corridors. So I want to look at those 5 corridors, which I have ranked based on the sum of the gravity scores for each city pair in that corridor. But before we get there, let's look at a few examples to get a feel for what these gravity scores mean. And if you're trying to check my math at home, first of all, I appreciate your extreme commitment. Second, note that I've chopped off a few zeros to make the scores more palatable. The cutoff to make the list starts at scores just a bit below 200. This includes many city pairs considered for high-speed rail in the US, mostly outside of the Northeast Corridor, as well as some of the medium, but still respectable, demand routes in other parts of the world. A score between 500 and 1,000 is good, and includes many of the highest demand city pairs on existing rail systems in Europe. A score between 1,000 and 2,000 is great. This includes several city pairs on the Northeast Corridor in the US, and many cities in China and India that have high rail demand. And any score over 2,000 is exquisite. Out of the 50,000 plus city pairs that I looked at, only around 40 reach 2,000 points. The highest city pairs in the world score over 10,000, some as high as 20,000. But that's really just reserved for the mega regions of the world, all of which are in Asia, especially China and India. Keep in mind that these numbers are a measure of demand, not ridership. Ridership demands on travel times, service frequencies, ticket prices, alternate travel options, and is much trickier to calculate. So that's a lot of numbers and tables. Let's get to the results. Number 5, Jakarta to Singapore. Indonesia is the fourth largest country in the world by population, a stat that's often forgotten, but there is a lot of demand here. Indonesia has spent the last decade improving rail service throughout Java, including a new high-speed route that connects Jakarta with Bandung, which is one of the highest scored routes on the entire list with a gravity score over 20,000. But there's demand for a route that connects up to Singapore as well, via the island of Sumatra. So here, I want to introduce you to the gravity score chart. This maps the gravity score for both the individual segments on the route, say from Singapore to Palembang and from Palembang to Jakarta, as well as the demand for travel directly between Singapore and Jakarta. The width of the orange bars are scaled to reflect the size of the gravity scores. So by adding these up, you get a sense for the total demand on any particular segment. Please do keep in mind this is only counting demand between the cities I included in the analysis, which are those with over 2 million people. So you likely would have other stops on the route, which also have varying levels of demand, but I'm not including those in these charts. Still, it gives a reasonable estimate for what demand could look like across different segments. So let's go to number 4, West Africa. The ranking suggests a trunk line with Lagos at the center, starting in the west with Accra, Ghana, and spanning through Nigeria to Port Harcourt. This could connect the existing spur from Lagos to Ibadan and open up potential future expansion to connect with the existing line in Cameroon between Douala and Yaoundé. Lagos is the economic center of West Africa and would also be the center of this corridor. All cities have a 200+ score with Lagos, and the heaviest demand would likely be between Lomé and Benin City, with an aggregate gravity score just shy of 1,000 points. For number 3, we're going back to Southeast Asia. There's quite a bit of modeled demand for an east-west connection between Myanmar and Vietnam, passing through Thailand and Cambodia. This could connect and leverage the existing rail network in Thailand and Vietnam, helping to better connect the region. I'm showing just the rail lines here that would directly tie into this corridor, but keep in mind there are other lines as well that run through Thailand that would help connect the broader network. The connection between Phnom Penh and Ho Chi Minh City would likely be the most justified and the workhorse of this corridor, with service to Bangkok also providing 200+ scores in each direction. Connecting with Yangon, of course, would be difficult given the 2021 coup and current military dictatorship in Myanmar, but crazier things have happened. Before I get to the top 2, please remember to like and subscribe if you want more videos with random tables and graphs to show up in your YouTube feed. I'm thinking I might do a deep dive into a few of these corridors in future videos, so let me know if there's any one in particular I should prioritize, either on this list or otherwise. A couple of honorable mentions. Bogota to Medellin seems like a pretty good place to start interrail service in Colombia. It was the 6th highest ranking city pair on the final list that I came up with, but it just isn't part of a series of city pairs that make up a high potential corridor. There's also several international links that are incomplete, but I excluded these because they are impacted mostly by politics or frothy diplomatic relations. The connections between India and Pakistan do exist, they have the rails, they just stopped operating the trains. But I do see a lot of demand from Delhi to Lahore and Ahmedabad into Karachi, if the politics can be put aside. Also, not to pick on India, but their connection between Calcutta and Bangladesh is also very lackluster. It's off the list because technically there is rail service, but it's currently a 20+ hour multi-train ride between Calcutta and Dhaka, compared to around 7.5 hours by road. The United States is mostly off this list. We don't have very good rail service, but we do have rail service. However, we are missing a few international links. 2 in particular. First, Tijuana has decent scores with Los Angeles and San Diego, if you count that as a separate metro. And there is a light rail service that goes directly to the border from San Diego, but I do think that connecting the Losan corridor down to the border from downtown San Diego would have a lot of benefits, and there's already 2 rail right-of-ways that could be used to help do that. On the northern border, connecting the Windsor-Toronto line to Detroit would make a lot of sense, especially now that they just stopped the one bus between the 2 cities. Windsor is often referred to as South Detroit, but currently if you're born and raised there, you can't take a midnight train just anywhere. I really don't like that song. Speaking of borders, Kinshasa and Brazzaville. I didn't include it on the list since these cities comprise the same metro area, but just to point out, I think a connection of any sort between these 2 cities is probably the most justified public works project, period. Yeah, the Congo River is big and these countries are both dealing with scarce resources, but it's 2 capital cities that make up the largest binational region in the world. It seems like a connection would spur so much growth and better connect the region. How is this not on the top of the list for the World Bank or other development institutes? Let me know in the comments if you know the whole story here. Continuing with the top 5 list, let's go to number 2, which is Brazil. There have been talks for over a decade about providing passenger rail in Brazil. Often those discussions are focused on a high-speed connection between Rio de Janeiro and Sao Paulo, And I do think that would serve as a great center for a corridor that connects from Belo Horizonte down to Curitiba. The trunk route between Rio and Sao Paulo has demand which rivals many of the larger city pairs in China and India. And the entire route shows aggregate demand around or even above 1,000 points, which is similar or better than, say, London to Paris. And the number one missing corridor, Mexico. Like Brazil, there's been talks for decades about rail, high-speed or otherwise, connecting Guadalajara to Mexico City and then onwards to Puebla. Unlike Brazil, Mexico has been building intercity rail. It's just not on that corridor. That's really a topic for its own video, but suffice it to say, I'm excluding Tren Maya and some of the other tourist-oriented train routes off the network map. I was surprised to see the connection between Mexico City and Monterrey making the list as well, but it is the second busiest air route from Mexico City, just behind Cancun. I guess those Cancun goers are not hopping on Tren Maya. By far, the largest demand on this network, and the largest demand on the entire list, is between Mexico City and Puebla. In fact, this is the only bar that I couldn't keep at scale. It would have gone off the screen if I did. Guadalajara also has great demand, which is even more impressive given that it's quite far away from Mexico City, about 500 kilometers. So this is fun to look at, but why should we care? Well, if you happen to be an infrastructure investor, if you work at a development bank, a national department, or something even more boutique, these projects are worth some focus. Also, get off of YouTube and do some real analysis. If you're involved in politics, these projects also could be a good place to focus attention. And that's not just true for politicians. If you live in one of these corridors, consider supporting these projects if they show up on a ballot, or even just in casual conversation. That's all I've got for today. Please remember to like and subscribe. See you next time.